Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Constance Amstutz. I'm a wealth advisor here at JFS Wealth Advisors, and I work primarily out of our Hermitage office as well as our Pittsburgh location. I am a certified financial planner and a certified divorce financial analyst. My work is focused on helping clients to navigate major transitions in their life around their finances to provide clarity and confidence. And divorce is obviously one of the most significant life changes that could happen. It's work that I feel deeply passionate about, and I'm really looking forward to our time today and helping to educate you in areas that will hopefully add value. Today's webinar will run for approximately 30 minutes. Following up to that, we will have a question and answer session, Q&A portion. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, you should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please put any questions that you have there, and we will look to address those at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So our focus today is on navigating divorce and the different elements that come along with that. It is, as we've said, an extremely challenging time and process to go through. Full disclosure before getting into too much detail here. This presentation is for general education purposes. It's for information only. Anything that we cover today is not intended to constitute as legal or tax advice. Your financial situation in a divorce is highly specific. Therefore, anyone on this webinar today or anyone who hears the recordings should speak with their qualified legal counsel, accounting, tax professional, and financial professional team regarding your individual circumstances. So some of the topics that we'll go over today, we're going to share the CDFA perspective. That's the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. We'll talk briefly about our role and how we help individuals navigate these situations. We'll discuss some of the divorce proceedings, how to prepare for those, what to expect as you enter into this stage. We'll also talk about next steps after your divorce is finalized. We'll also touch on a few key topics around taxes, inheritance, and Social Security. And then, as I said at the end, we will cover a Q&A portion as well. So to share my own personal story, how did I get here? What led me to being a CDFA professional and specializing in divorce and separation planning? As we work with clients, we see them build a life around a joint partnership with their spouse. And when someone gets married, initially, they're usually not anticipating that they will also be divorced later down the line. What we see in difficult situations that we go through in life, whether it is divorce or even the death of a loved one, emotions are extremely high. And most people know that when you're in a high stress environment, you're not necessarily thinking clearly. And we've seen some situations where individuals make decisions just purely based on that emotional pressure, whether they want the divorce to just be wrapped up already. They just want to be done and over with it. It's a common thing that we hear. But it is important to make sure that we are making good decisions, financially strategic decisions, because these choices we make today will impact us for the rest of our life. Now, obviously, there's changes that can happen on the legal aspect, but it does become difficult after things have been finalized. So making sure that we are entering this new phase of life with clear, mindful decisions is extremely important. So that is our goal. Our goal is to give you balance and grounding as you're going through and navigating divorce, to being a part of your team and making you comfortable with what's next. So before and during divorce proceedings, we really need to think on a higher level. Most people, I would say, come into divorce thinking that there will be a 50-50 split. That's not always the case. And as I said, this is a high stress, high emotions event. We want to be that steady hand in leading you through this. You need to understand that each state does have various laws. So there are community property states, for example, A smaller list of those: Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. Those are our community property states. And a general overview is that as far as ownership goes, all property and earnings acquired during marriage are considered community property, owned 50-50, regardless of whose name is on the title. The other states that I did not mention fall under common law. So the ownership approach there is that assets belong to the spouse who acquired them or whose name is on the title, the deed, or registration. Division in a divorce, those community property states typically split everything 50-50. Common law states often divide property through equitable distribution, not equal, equitable. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. What that means is something that is fair, not always 50-50. And it's going to be based on various factors such as income and contributions. So when we begin thinking beyond that 50-50 split, here are some key things to keep in mind. Again, divorce brain, as we will call it today, is very real. High stress does lead to poor financial decision making. Our job is to be the objective thinking brain during this time. The other thing to really understand is the true value of an asset that is being considered for division. $100,000 in a checking account is not equal to $100,000 in a 401k. There are tax considerations we need to be mindful of. So we want to look at the net after tax value to ensure that the settlement is being properly understood. And then, of course, when we're thinking about what's next after this, that is oftentimes a difficult thing to think about. But we do want to look at our lifestyle and budget analysis, not necessarily what we have, but what things will cost in our future. What will our budget look like in the future? So all of these different components go into the divorce proceedings. They will help the attorney with identifying what matters most and how to work for you. And that brings me to really building the right team. So when we're getting ready to enter into a divorce, the typical thought is I need to find a divorce attorney, and that's absolutely right. So the divorce attorney would handle the legal procedures that come along with the divorce, filing your legal documents, managing court procedures, interpreting, applying law, drafting and reviewing the settlements. A financial advisor or a certified divorce financial analyst, we analyze the assets. We look at your 401k, your IRA, pensions, stock options, real estates, all of your assets that you have, as well as your liabilities. But with the assets, we want to calculate that after-tax value and really see what's there, not necessarily what's on the surface. We help the attorney with creating these settlement scenarios and projecting out what that looks like for you in the long term, building that post-divorce budget, identifying if there are hidden or even overlooked financial issues. All of those components are important here. So a good way to think about this, an attorney answers the question of, is this legal and enforceable? A CDFA professional will look at this as, is this financially smart? And is it fair over time? So we collaborate with the attorney to work through the divorce process. Some other individuals that will be part of the process, of course, your tax advisor, they're extremely important on evaluating the tax consequences or circumstances, both now and what's to come. And then, of course, some people should speak with a personal support person, just someone that's in your corner to help you through, or a divorce coach, or a combination of. Our goal is to work together to really help you reach a settlement that's both legally sound and financially smart while keeping unnecessary costs down. A great example, an attorney does bill on an hourly basis. If they have to chase or try to understand financial documents, that can add both time for them and cost for you. So having a CDFA involved in those instances can help you to decrease the expenses over the long term and save everybody time and hopefully headache as well. So things to think about, getting organized is a big one. So organizing your records and your information, going through and collecting specific documents. If you are working with a CDFA professional, we do provide a list of documents that are needed during a discovery meeting. And we go through uncovering what we need and likely what the attorney needs, although they may request, additional information too. A pro tip here, give the CDFA what they ask for. Again, they can help to reduce the number of hours the attorney's putting in and just considering all the different financial components. What we work through is organizing your documents, but preparing asset summaries and reports later on down the line, running those different settlement scenarios, creating some alternative solutions that might help along the way. So it does help to speed up the process and it clears financial analysis. It makes it a clear picture. Fewer disputes, fewer meetings, hopefully less filings and court appearances. Time saved does equal money saved. When we're thinking about your budget, we again want to change our mindset. We want to go from thinking about what is ours to what is mine, because we're changing from a married to a single budget moving forward. So think about things that how your picture will look after your divorce. It is important to really hone in on what is most important to you and what type of lifestyle that you want to see after the divorce is finalized. That is extremely difficult to do, but working towards it will help you as well as helping the attorney to know what it is that we need to fight for. So when it comes to negotiations, before negotiating anything, again, make that list of what matters most. Clarity today will prevent regret tomorrow. And when everything does feel uncertain, your priorities become your compass. So when things get challenging, if they do during a divorce, you have that to rely back on and refer to keep you centered and grounded. And of course, the team that you've built around you will help you to navigate that too. A really important thing, understanding the assets and liabilities. So again, your attorney will have you identify what's likely marital versus separate property. This is a big consideration. If you had assets prior to your marriage, if you've received inheritances during your marriage, there are different qualifications that will go into determining marital versus separate property, and the attorney and a judge are the ones to do that. It is important, again, to take inventory of all of the various accounts that you have. Records are important. Showing what assets were pre-marriage can show up on statements. That's extremely helpful. We look at tax returns. We do want to see the prior 3 years. 5 years is even better, because the unfortunate truth is that in some divorces, hidden assets are a real thing. So we want to make sure we can trace and track the activity that's been happening. Again, just to be even on the safe side, to know that everything is as it seems. We do have checklists as well, tools that will help you with determining what all of those assets are. Even things that you might not consider as an asset will be mentioned on that checklist. A big one, a big concern for people navigating divorce can be liabilities. And this is a difficult conversation, especially if you do have a spouse that has accumulated debt more than you've accepted or more than you've been aware of. That is a challenge. There is a difference between divorce agreements versus creditor rights. So a divorce decree can assign responsibility for a debt, meaning spouse A has to pay off a credit card. But that agreement is between you and your ex-spouse, not necessarily the lender. So if a debt is in both names, that credit card, for example, the creditor can still pursue either of you for a payment of that debt. So even if spouse A is ordered to pay that joint credit card, spouse B is technically still able to be sought after by the lender. There is marital versus separate debt. Obviously, this would be debt that was incurred during the marriage, is typically shared responsibility. Separate debt would be incurred before or after separation. And that usually boils down to an individual. Again, even if the court decides to assign that marital debt to one spouse, the creditors are not bound by that decision. One important component that legal counsel can consider is to include an indemnification clause in the agreements. And basically, this is a legal protection, though not foolproof, that if one spouse is assigned a debt but fails to pay, they must protect or indemnify and reimburse the other spouse for any harm that results. That could be court costs, that could be it's primarily court costs, but so that's an important consideration when we're looking at the various liabilities and the arrangements with your spouse. Again, there are some unfortunate circumstances where individuals are not aware of the amount of debt that is being accumulated by another spouse, whether that's for a business or personal reasons. One thing that you can do to protect yourself financially is to safeguard your accounts by freezing your credit. So credit hygiene, think about freezing joint lines to protect them from pulling any additional funds out, really just from a disgruntled spouse. Review your joint accounts, review the activity, make sure, and we'll help you with this, make sure that no cash or assets are moving in and out that you're not aware of. We will look at statements, we'll look at activity with you. We know where the red flags are, and if we need to be having a deeper conversation with the attorney so they can subpoena, if need be, to see where this asset movement has happened. Some of the immediate needs, and we've covered this ever so slightly, but think about your budget. Again, this is difficult to do, especially when you're unsure of what steps are next for you, what that after divorce picture looks like. But it is important to start thinking about that. Health insurance is a major component to consider. If you're currently covered under your spouse's health insurance, what is the plan moving forward? Are we falling under COBRA? Are we looking at the healthcare marketplace? Can we be covered through our own employer? There are various considerations depending on what stage you are in life, obviously will impact what that looks like. Secure important personal items. The one thing I think about is a great grandmother's artwork that was given to a grandchild, great grandchild, passed down through the family. That's an important family heirloom if it's of concern. Obviously, make sure that is protected. Any important documents from a personal standpoint, make sure you are also keeping track of those and having those at hand. Continue to cover your household expenses. Keep paying the bills as you were. Sometimes that can come into question as well, which can always be a conversation with the attorney that we will be a part of as well. But continue to pay those bills as you were. Same when it comes to dependents. When we think about for people who have children, that makes the divorce even more challenging. Most times what we hear is, I don't want anything to change for the kids. I want this to feel as normal as possible for them. And that is entirely understandable. Children are extremely resilient, but what we can do to try to just give them a sense of stability as we're navigating through this is, again, to continue just paying any sort of costs associated with that, whether that's childcare or school activities. Again, we want to try and keep it as normal as possible for them. That's one way that we can do that. But also know that they are resilient and adaptable, and it's going to be a challenge for everyone, but as we walk through it together, we will get through it too. So what's next? The attorney will have negotiations. There will be settlement discussions that occur. That after-tax translation is extremely valuable in these circumstances. We need to make sure we're understanding how everything actually is not how everything actually looks. And sometimes there's more to discover. We can be walking through these negotiations and realize that maybe there was some sort of activity or another asset that was unintentionally forgot about. So in occasion, it's not necessarily the end. We do need to continue navigating that discovery process. To kind of paint the picture around this after-tax approach that I continue to refer to, I am going to share a case study with you. And this is really that face value split effect. So what we're looking at is a division of assets between two spouses, John and Jane. And in this instance, John felt strongly that he wanted to keep his employer retirement plan. He worked very hard for that. And Jane was fine with that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it was the best approach for John either. Now, this is coming in assuming that we are doing a 50-50 split between spouses. Again, that is not always going to be the case. In this case, John did have around $1.3 million in his traditional 401k. He also had $550,000 assigned to him as the Roth IRA asset. They did have a joint brokerage. Around $650,000 went to John. $150,000 in their cash savings account went to John. And we decided Jane's going to keep the marital home. We'll try to divide the assets. Jane wants to stay in the marital home. We will do that. You can see on the opposite side, Jane has not received any of the traditional 401k or does not plan to. The Roth IRA, she will have a larger portion, $750,000. The joint brokerage, a lesser value because she does get a larger value in cash and savings. That's close to that is $1 million. And then the marital home, of course, is $650,000. So what can happen is we look at this situation, we look at what the total value split between the spouses are, and we see, okay, $2,650,000 to each spouse. That's relatively even. We'll go with that. However, when we take into consideration the tax consequences, that might not play out in the way that you would think. So when we look at Jane, her share, $1 million in cash, that's immediate tax-free purchasing power versus $150,000 for John. That traditional 401k that John really wanted to hold on to will have taxes when he pulls from it, assuming he's in a 24% marginal tax rate or an effective tax rate of 20%. There are obviously, there's a reduced amount that he will be receiving. The Roth IRA accounts are beneficial. If they meet all of the certain criteria, it can be tax-free income to them in retirement. The marital home, one of the notes that you see the note at the bottom that refers to the marital home having an original purchase value of $250,000. The reason that's important, there is an exclusion for your residence as an individual. It's $250,000 on the capital gain. For a married couple, it's $500,000. So it is reduced in half once Jane is divorced from John. And if she decides to sell that home, there is a potential tax consequence that can come along with that. And backing up to the joint brokerage account, we have to consider the capital gains in that account too. So even if we're splitting at a pro rata basis for the capital gains, there could certainly be a large liability. So when we take all of these things into consideration, what we see as a result is that John does potentially receive a lesser share in after-tax considerations than Jane would be. And that's around 250,000. So John's traditional 401k, although valued slightly higher, would be closer to about $1 million after tax. The joint brokerage, when we consider capital gains, obviously has a reduced value. And same with the home. There will be a tax consequence because that exclusion is now reduced for Jane, and they have a large capital gain in their marital home. That's a big consideration, especially for individuals who are navigating a great divorce, for example. This is going to be people that are closer to or in retirement. Maybe they've been in their home for 40 years and real estate value has increased significantly over time. So this should be top of mind for you as you're navigating these discussions with your attorney. Again, as a CDFA professional, this is what we look at. So to summarize that you'll potentially see as you're navigating through divorce. Initially, we're getting to an understanding of what your situation is and how do we plan around that? What does the end result look like for you or should look like for you? We want to file for divorce, make sure that we're stabilized, going through that disclosure and analysis process, looking at all of your investments, your assets, your liabilities, taking all of that into an account and really analyzing what the potential divisions could look like. And then, of course, the attorney is going to go through that negotiation or litigation process if it gets to that point, and then the finalizing of the divorce and enforcing what was decided during that settlement. CDFAs are with you through this entire process. We want to be included from start to finish. We have had instances where there's been negotiations and it was just time for us to step in. The attorney wanted us to take a look, the client wanted us to take a look, and we've become involved at that point. So ideally, we'll start with you from the beginning, but we're always willing to jump in wherever need be to help provide clarity and confidence for you as you make these decisions. When we think about the timeline on navigating a divorce, uncontested divorces on average take about 1 to 3 months to settle. So it's, pretty simple. No one disagrees. We're okay with the decisions we've made. Then there are mediated divorces that can take around 3 to 6 months on average. There's a bit more complexity of finances as well as custody potentially. Then there's collaborative divorce. This can take around 3 to 9 months on average, a bigger window here, but it's a lot of team coordination, it's professional availability. There are more moving parts that are associated with that. And then the longest divorce process can be litigation, and that's when you're going in front of a judge. Anywhere from 9 months to 24 months, and we've seen divorces that have went longer than that. One of the biggest components that can help reduce the amount of time spent in the divorce process is to provide clarity around your finances. That's one of the biggest considerations aside from children, child support, and spousal support. Division of assets pretty much takes the cake. And what helps is when we provide the clarity, not just to you as our client, but also to your attorney so that they can make an argument for what's right. And even more importantly, in these litigated cases, to the judge. The judge needs to understand what exactly the picture looks like, why we are making the choices that we are, or recommending what we are. And when they understand, typically we see movement in a better way than if they don't. It's important for them to know that they're making the right judicial decision as well. So a lot of moving parts that are happening with the divorce, and depending on the process itself, what avenue you take will fluctuate the time that it takes to get through it. Thinking into the future, after the divorce is finalized, there are some key considerations and actions that you need to take. Of course, finalizing the asset movement that's incident to the divorce. So that's transferring the accounts, whether it's 401k, IRA, whatever the assets are, transitioning those as appropriate. Many individuals will change their name if you would like to do that. Revising your estate plan is a big one, and that coincides with reviewing your beneficiary designations. I have seen individuals that have came to us as clients after their divorce. We did not help them with their divorce, but after their divorce, their ex-spouse is still named on their life insurance policy, still named on their 401k plan and other retirement accounts, and they didn't realize it because there is a lot to go over. There's a lot to consider. So having the right team in place to help make sure that you've hit all of these different markers is extremely important. We've also heard stories backing up to that asset division with a QDRO. That is a qualified domestic relations order. This specifically helps to divide retirement account assets, meaning a 401k plan or a pension plan. It has been written, agreed upon in the legal process, but there was not anyone to execute it. And where that becomes a bit scary is a few years from now, the values have changed, it adds complexity, it just complicates the matter further. So making sure that these different elements are addressed for you are extremely important. When we look at that insurance component, as I said, removing the ex-spouse, not just from your life insurance, but whether it could be your health, auto, home policy, all of these different elements that go into your risk management and insurance should be looked at. You will likely work with an estate attorney to revise new documents. If you've had estate documents drafted before, things change. So it's important that you understand what your wishes are moving forward, and we document those appropriately. So I've talked briefly about this through several slides, but dividing retirement accounts, that property sale tax consequence that we talked about is a big issue. Asset appreciation with capital gains in brokerage accounts can be a big issue. So making sure that these accounts are processed and transitioned appropriately without incurring any additional expenses is important. If an IRA transfer is not processed as an incident to divorce, what can happen is they take it as a distribution. There's potential taxes or 10% early withdrawal penalty if that applies. Many times we can correct that, but it is important to have those done correctly in the first time. So another big consideration too is to think about your taxes on your tax withholding on your W-2 income. That is going to change. Your circumstances will change, so that should be top of mind. How you are in terms of your marital standing at the end of the year, so as of December 31st, is how you are considered for the entire year. So if you are divorced mid-year, you are considered single for that full year. Adjusting to whether it's a single or head of household tax filing, that should be considered with your W-2 wage withholdings. So it's been quite a bit to digest already, but again, this is an extremely sensitive situation. It is very challenging to go through this process, and you don't have to do it alone. Something that we do need to keep in mind is rebuilding our financial foundation after the divorce is finalized. Your investment strategy could change. Perhaps you were more aggressive and your ex-spouse was risk averse. Making sure that what your investments or how your investments are structured meets your goals matters moving forward. We need to look at rebuilding or ensuring that we have a good emergency fund, looking at that insurance coverage like we talked about, and monitor your credit reports. And we don't want to assume that any spouse would take the initiative to do something that would be harmful, but unfortunately it does happen. So moving along, we'll cover a few different key topics that often come up in conversation. We'll talk about taxes, we'll talk about inheritance and Social Security and what that looks like. So as I said, what you were on 12/31, the end of the year will be your filing status for the year. So look at those pay withholdings, W-2 or other income streams. If you receive partnership income, maybe it's adjusting the withholding or what the tax payment should be on your quarterly estimates. Those things need to be considered. Social Security is a big topic. If your marriage did last for 10 years, you may qualify for benefits on your ex-spouse's record, even if they remarry, as long as you remain unmarried. And there are some nuances to that. So a person can remarry after age 60 or 50 if widowed and still receive Social Security benefits based on the ex-spouse's record. Those specific rules before age 60, if you remarry, you generally do lose the right to collect on the benefits of your ex-spouse's record. After age 60, remarriage does not affect that ability. The benefit you receive on your ex's record does not reduce your ex-spouse's benefit for themselves. They do not get impacted by that in any way. So, to give a practical example, Jane and John were divorced after 15 years. Jane is 62 and she remarried at 61. John is 65 and eligible for Social Security, wants to collect. Jane can still claim benefits on John's record if it is higher than her own because she remarried after age 60. If you do have multiple ex-spouses, you can apply for benefits based on each ex-spouse who meets the criteria. So Social Security will pay the higher of your own benefit or any of your ex-spouse's benefits. You don't receive combined payments, and it's up to 50% to clarify there, of your ex-spouse's benefit record. You cannot stack multiple ex-spouse benefits. You only get the highest of the individual benefit, which would be that 50% of the ex-spouse or your own Social Security, whichever is higher. Again, some basic requirements. Marriage had to have lasted at least 10 years. You're at least 62 years old to collect on Social Security. You're not currently married again, and your benefit on your own work record is less than the expected ex-spouse's benefit. Inherited assets. When we're looking at inherited assets, we want to consider how these assets are owned, if they've provided any sort of lifestyle benefit to the ex-spouse. The danger that we see is if one individual receives, we'll use a wife for an example here. If a wife receives an inheritance, she keeps the funds separate, but she uses those funds to fund vacations or a new home purchase or anything that would potentially be constituted as benefiting the household, benefiting that ex-spouse or future ex-spouse. There is a chance that those assets could be considered as marital property. They do take that into consideration. It does depend on the attorney, the judge, and how the proceedings go. But that is something important to keep in mind. If you are inheriting assets and you are keeping it separate with purpose, be careful on how you are using those assets to fund your lifestyle. As I've said, this is an extremely difficult situation. Whether it's you or someone you know that is navigating through divorce, it is an extremely difficult time. Divorce is often compared to death because there is a grieving process that comes along with this. But it's not just about dividing assets. It's about finding a way forward, finding a new you, a new life, but it is challenging. So give yourself some grace. Give the individuals that you know navigating through divorce, give them grace. It's not a legal ending, it's a new chapter, but it is a challenging one and can be. So allow yourself room to heal, room to process. Be that supportive person if you do know someone that is navigating divorce, and know that help is available every step of the way. We are here to help answer questions, to provide guidance however we can. We want to be a partner and walk through this with you if you are going through a divorce situation. So with that being said, we will move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. There is a QR code on the screen. We'll leave this up for the remainder of the webinar. What this will do is take you to our website. If you would like to have a deeper conversation, talk through your specific needs or situation, we are happy to do that with you. Again, you can use your phone, pull up your camera, show the QR code, and it will take you directly to our website. At that point, you can scroll all the way down to the bottom and fill out the request to have someone connect with you. Okay, one question we have, how do I determine my true post-divorce budget and lifestyle needs when there are so many unknown things? That is a really great question. The one thing to keep in mind is this will likely be ever evolving because we are trying to determine a new lifestyle, a new life, a new chapter that is not entirely painted clearly. But to help you in doing a post-divorce budget, you can track actual expenses for 30 to 60 days. Focus on things of immediate need, like housing, your utilities, debts, rather than dividing past expenses in half. This will allow you to capture what your actual expenses are now. Prioritize those essential costs, adjust for single household lifestyle if need be. And again, we will walk through this with you and helping you go through those considerations and making sure that your budget, that post-divorce budget, does align with your current needs as well as your long-term goals. We don't want to lose sight of that either. Great question. What financial mistakes do you see most people make early in divorce? One big consideration is definitely forgetting about taxes. It's easy, again, to look at assets and assume that it's an equal division, that things will be split equally. Again, most states are looking at equitable division, not equally, but do not forget to consider taxes. We will work with the attorney. We will paint this picture for a judge if it gets to that point. That is all a part of what we do. Another really big one, and this would probably take precedence over the first, many people fight to keep the marital home. And I see this often with individuals who have children. And I can completely understand why. We want to give stability to the children. We want things to remain as normal as possible for them. And that is in the best way, thinking about them and keeping them as a priority. What we need to be mindful of, though, is to not get ourselves into a situation later on down the line that creates more of a burden than a benefit to not just us, but to our children who have been the forefront of that decision for most cases I see. So running through that post-divorce budget, like we just talked about, making sure that the expenses associated with the house are sustainable, that you can make those payments, that you will not find yourself in a cash poor, home rich situation. Another big thing to think about is if you do have a mortgage on the home, if you can have it refinanced, if you can assume the mortgage, do you qualify to refinance the mortgage under your own income as an individual? Do you have what is needed to qualify for that mortgage? And then a few other things I would say is certainly overlooking assets or what should be considered as an asset. We've seen flyer miles that should be considered. Failing to plan for future major expenses, and obviously skipping professional help is a really big one. We need to know our limits, regardless of what that is, and making sure that we're just even having education conversations around what we need to be thinking about, what best next steps are, maybe some different areas of focus we haven't quite considered. Conversations are free. Make sure that you are doing that. Okay. Seeing no other questions right now, I will wrap up the webinar for today. But I do want to say again, thank you for joining us this morning. If you have found this valuable, there will be a copy of the webinar that comes to you. Share it with someone who needs it. If we can be a resource, you can go to our JFS website. We do have a divorce checklist. That's a great reference point. Again, I am always happy to have a conversation if I can provide or add value or make this process just a little bit easier. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day